I am bursting with pride to welcome our very special guest today. He's a native of Baltimore, Maryland. He's a professor of anthropology at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. He's earned a master's at the University of Michigan and a doctorate in anthropology from the University of Texas at Austin. He's authored several books. One that just comes right to mind is his book on vocalist Roland Hayes. His Roland Hayes, The Legacy of an American Tenor, co-written with collaborator Robert Sims in 2015. And of course, the book that we're really talking about here today, he collaborated with Shirley Verett on her autobiography in 2003, I Never Walked Alone. We are thrilled he is here. Dr. Christopher Brooks, how are you?
Thank you, Arthur. And
Thank you.
I'd just like to say that given what's going on in our country today, that even though Ms. Verett hasn't been with us for close to 10 years, she would really be bemoaning the events that led up to the protests going on. And I think that we need to keep that in mind, that in many ways, even for those of us who are educated and accomplished, the struggle does continue. And she was very much in that spirit.
Wow, and it definitely was a fascinating career that was very unconventional. That she was often called the Maverick herself. So let's talk a little bit about her. We know she's born in 1931. We just would have celebrated her last week. What would have been her 89th birthday.
That's right.
On May 31st. May 31st, I believe it was.
Yes.
So she's born during the time of the Great Depression, 1931, in the South, and she grows up in a very conservative and religious family. They're Seventh-day Adventists. Could you talk maybe a bit about that for us?
Well, you're right. She was born in New Orleans in 1931, and it was a combination of several influences there. There were Catholics, there were the Adventists, and her paternal grandmother had her own church, and we might call it different things. Some suggested that it was kind of a holiness church of sorts, but she described in great detail how her grandmother, who was called Mother Verett, in some of these ceremonies would march into the church, and what some of the gestures were. And I'm smiling because Miss Verett herself said that when she sang the role of Ulrica and Un ballo in Maschera, she mimicked some of those gestures of her grandmother, her clapping her hands or, going around like this, like in a trance of some sort. So anyway, there was a mixture of several things, not to mention the Cajun. She had facility with French at that time. And so there were quite a few things there in her background, but she grew up in an Adventist tradition where she was a lacto-ovo vegetarian. They worshiped the Sabbath, among several things. And while they sang, because her first voice teacher was her father, while they sang in the family, they were very conservative when it came to things like opera, concert music, etc. I remember the River Over Jordan, one of the songs that she sang. Her father had quite a voice himself, and they sang as a family group on Sunday evening. But that development was kind of an epiphany for her, because when she advanced to later years, she had to deal with the idea that Adventism did not really subscribe to that. And her argument to her parents, well, why would God give me this instrument and I not use it in the way that I believe that I should? So that's how she came to peace with it. And eventually, so did they.
Wonderful. So in 1955, she makes an appearance on the Arthur Godfrey Show, and I guess that changes her, well, it's one of many changes, but that starts to change her course. Can you talk a little bit about what happened as a result of that?
Well, she had been studying with a few teachers in California who liked what she did. And there was one teacher or one influence, and that was Hal Johnson, the great Hal Johnson, the composer, the arranger of choral works, etc. And he had an expression for her that she should hurry slowly. And she took that to heart. Now, where Godfrey came about, Godfrey, of course, that was a very popular show at the time. As a result of auditioning, going to New York with the Godfrey show with her then husband, her first husband, James Carter, she auditioned for Juilliard. And she met several people and was offered a scholarship there where she studied with a woman by the name of Marion Freschel, or who they call Madame Freschel. And she helped to in her training, her teaching, etc. And Madame Freschel also had several other well-known students like Marian Anderson, Camilla Williams, and there's one other, Mademoiselle Dobbs maybe, but I have to go back and double check that one though.
Gotcha. So in 1961, so she graduates from Juilliard. She wins the Metropolitan Opera Council auditions. Now, can you tell me about this? Often when someone would win those auditions, it would lead immediately to a debut, but that did not happen in her case. Do we know why that didn't happen right away? Her debut takes place in 68, 7 years later.
Yeah, it's important to point out that she didn't win first place in that. First place was in fact won by George Shirley, who sang Nessun Dorma. And she, although she was, a little bitter that she didn't win it, but she had to concede. She said he sang the hell out of that of that aria, and so anyway, she said he deserved to win it.
So she makes her debut finally at the Met 7 years later in 68 as Carmen. She returns as Eboli, but I understand she didn't really feel that she was taken very seriously at the Met until 1973. Can you talk about what happened in 1973?
Well, the big event, as you said, was the Les Troyens, and that came about as a result of Raphael Kubelik, the celebrated conductor. And how that developed is that she was offered the role of a Cassandra, but she wanted to sing Didon because she had sung Didon in a Radio Italiana performance in 1969 with Marilyn Horne singing Cassandra and Gedda. Mm-hmm. And she wanted Cassandra, but that had already been offered to Christa Ludwig. Well, as they were in rehearsals, the Christa Ludwig, as it turns out, wasn't doing well. And so several people suggested that she learn the role. And she said, well, no, why should I do that? And, when Christa Ludwig will sing it. Well, as they got closer and closer to the opening night in 1973, there was the dress rehearsal, and she went to Raphael, Maestro Kubelik, and said, look, I don't want to sing this dress rehearsal or sing both of these roles tonight when on Monday I might be tired and I won't do my absolute best. So he hedged a little, and she stood her ground. He said, okay, I give you my word. If you sing this rehearsal, you will sing both roles on Monday, the following Monday. And so she did. And of course, that launched her into superstardom.
Wonderful. I just wanted to tell for those listeners who may not be familiar with the Berlioz's opera Les Troyens, she was, as you said, she was originally contracted to sing Cassandra, which often is sung by sopranos, which is also a big enough role. She's on the stage half the time as it is. But for her to take the other role as Didon meant that for the 4-hour opera, she was almost on stage the entire time. So it was a huge triumph that she made it through, not only just made it through, but sang so beautifully in both roles. And so that then leads up to the next thing I'd like to talk to you a bit about, and that's her triumph in Italy, specifically in 1975. Could you set the stage and tell us about that?
That was Verdi's Macbeth. And again, it was a conductor who was behind that whole enterprise. And in this particular instance, it was Claudio Abbado, Maestro Claudio Abbado. Yes. And he said, oh, Cheryl, you really need to consider this role. She said, she went to a performance of it and said, no, she said she had begun studying the score, and her husband, Lou, was with her, said, no, I don't know whether you should sing this opera. She said, no, There is a lot in this score that I could really work with.
Hmm.
Well, it was a top-notch performance with Piero Capuccilli singing Macbeth. And let's see, that was, I forgot the tenor, Tagliavini, I believe, but Lady Macbeth is really the primary role in it. And Nikolai Giarov was singing Banquo. And the result of that performance, La Scala offered her a blank contract and said, here's a blank contract. We'll do whatever you want. Just sign this contract and we will do whatever you want. But because of her family commitment, she had a young child at the time. She had made a commitment to being home during the summer. She didn't. And so in any case, that was it. But it was an incredible experience. And fortunately, there is a visual recording of that role, and she was great in it. One of the supreme interpreters of that opera.
We're actually going to play that segment right now. A few weeks ago, we highlighted Joan Sutherland and how the Italian public dubbed her La Stupenda after her debut there. But the Italian public also dubbed Shirley Verett. Could you tell us about that and her own name as well?
Well, the name that she was given informally, La Nera Callas, or the Black Callas. And again, with regard to her acting, her command of the stage, that was the informal name that she was given.
What were her feelings about that name?
What was that?
What were her feelings?
Yeah, she said, well, if they had come up with something other than naming her after another singer, that would have been her preference. But she took it in that stride. And one thing that she said about Italians, they love opera. She said, you could have been green, and as long as that voice is there and you on that stage, they would love you. And that was it.